This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW. Written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 368, entitled Why Feminism Had to Precede Masculism. This is part 2, carrying straight on. So, the male invention of the contraceptive pill has effectively liberated both sexes. Initially, it liberated women so that women could work, that is, have paid careers. That in turn allowed men to feel less pressured being the sole breadwinners. Upper middle class males increasingly learn to count on their wives or girlfriends to share the burden of earning the living, so that he could feel less stress and pressure compared to when he was the sole breadwinner. As women became careerists in millions of couples, the woman earned more money than the man. This financial liberation of men from being the sole breadwinner was the root cause of the masculist movement, the men's lib movement. That is, the liberation of men from being enslaved by employers and by financially dependent wives. So, from the above, it should be fairly obvious that it would have been impossible for masculism to have evolved before feminism. One can show this in the form of an argument by contradiction. That is, make an assumption which leads to a known contradiction, so conclude that the original assumption must be false. In symbolic terms, say you're trying to prove the statement A, so assume the opposite, that's not A or tilde A, from which one deduces B. But prior knowledge shows that not B is true. Hence, not A must be false. That is, not A must be true. But not A is A. So we have proved A. We are trying to prove that feminism must have come first. That's statement A. Assume the opposite. That is, masculism could come first. That is, not A. If masculism came first, then millions of men, as in today's masculist movement, would have rejected being the sole breadwinner and ditched their housewife wives and not paid for the food for children. Therefore, whole populations would have died out. Women and children would have starved in their millions. This is statement B. But B did not happen. There was no such mass starvation. Therefore, the original assumption, not A, must be false. So, not A is true, which is A. QED. That's an acronym in Latin, ad-libbing. Quod erat demonstrandum, which translates as was to be proved. It's a rather old-fashioned way of saying that's the end of the proof, or the end of proof mark. Nowadays, in modern mathematics texts, the end of proof mark is simply a hollow square. Continuing on. So, feminism had to come first. If masculism had come first, women and children would have starved en masse, which obviously did not happen. Once feminism got off the ground, it led to millions of women pouring into the workforce, which pushed women to become well qualified. So young women poured into higher education so that they could earn good money as careerists. Women learned to be career-wise, ambitious, as were men, so that women could share increasingly the burden of earning the living. Once women were careerists and earning good money, then, and only then, were men able to reduce the amount of time they spent on earning money for their families. Thus the pill liberated women, and hence women liberated men, in the sense that those women who became well-paid careerists enabled men to reduce their commitment to careerism, to being wage slaves to employers. Hence there is a comprehensible sequence in the liberation of the two sexes. First came the pill, plus household gadgets, etc., which created the feminist movement, which led to female careers, which freed up men from being the sole breadwinners, which allowed the growth of the masculist movement. Once both feminist and masculist consciousnesses are raised, most couples will be bi-conscious, in the sense that both the man and the woman in the couple are aware of feminist and masculist ideas, so that each understands the traditional gender role plight of the other sex, so that the man is not just a masculist, but also a male feminist, and that the woman is not just a feminist, but also a female masculist. Both have had both their gender political consciousnesses raised, that is, both feminist and masculist. Today, however, the level of development of masculist consciousness amongst women is still at the starting blocks. Most women, most feminists, know nothing about masculism. Most women have not even heard of the label masculist, so could not give a 2-minute speech on the core ideas of the masculists. The masculists are faced with the difficulty that society has been well informed about feminist ideas. Most people, including male journalists, have been pumped full of the idea most of their lives that gender oppression is a one-way street, that is, that it is men who oppress women and not vice versa. Thus it is difficult for the pioneering masculist theorists to penetrate this monoconscious prejudice, this belief that gender oppression involves oppressive men and oppressed women. Whereas the reverse is also true, that women also oppress men. And in fact, if one is well informed about oppressions in both directions, one sees that women oppress men far worse than vice versa, because women's oppression of men is continuous, lasting decades. For example, women's financial parasitism, women's manslavery, women's fluffy feminist hypocrisy in the divorce courts, women's many gender crimes, for example, paternity fraud, lying about taking the pill, getting pregnant and forcing the father to pay for a kid he doesn't want. Women's tooth and nail opposition to the legislation of the that's paternity rejection right. Utterly overlooking the profoundly hypocritical fact that women have the mara, so that a woman has the legal right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, but the man doesn't. The most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists. Thus, women need to be taught masculist ideas, which is one of the major roles of the masculist movement. Just as men were forced to adapt to the feminist changes in the mentality of women, women are now being forced to adapt to the masculist changes in the mentality of men. Fair is fair. What is good for the goose is good for the gander. The prediction is that just as happened in the 70s, when millions of newly feministed wives divorced their conservative husbands who failed to adapt to the changes in expectation of their feminist wives, so too will millions of newly masculisted men reject their conservative monoconscious girlfriends who will fail to adapt to the changes in expectation of their masculist boyfriends. Hope you followed that. In summary, feminism had to come first, then masculism. Feminism is well developed and is changing society profoundly. Masculism is just getting off the ground and will need more time to become as influential as feminism, but it will. Now it is the turn of men to be liberated from the oppressions of the traditional sole breadwinner role for the family. Monoconscious feminists need to understand that their feminist movement had to come first in order that men were in a position to liberate themselves. However, the process of the liberation of men has only just started, so will need more decades to work through the culture as thoroughly as has feminism. The full masculisting of men will have profound effects not only on men but on women as well, as masculisted men put powerful moral pressure on women to fit up, to grow up, and behave as responsible adults. The rise of masculism will have as much impact on women as had feminism. Most women have yet to come to terms with the newly rising masculism, and for millions of them it will be a painful process as millions of women fail to cope with the new masculist attitudes of the men in their lives. But cope they will, because men will give them no choice. Those women who do not accept the rise and rise of masculism will have their monoconscious genes removed from the gene pool by failing to persuade quality men to give them their sperm. The quality men are the first to go masculist due to their superior intelligence, their faster uptake of masculist ideas, and the first to reject women who do not become bi-conscious. The quality men, the ones women really want to mate with to get the superior DNA of quality men for their kids, will be the first to reject monoconscious, misandrist, man-dumping, feminazi bitches. On the other hand, bi-conscious feminists will be much more likely to have boyfriends, since their feminist anger at men, due to their feminist knowledge of how men oppress women, will be cancelled by a corresponding masculist anger at women, due to their masculist knowledge of how women oppress men. Such bi-conscious women will be much less feminazi bitchy towards men, and hence more approachable by men, so are more likely to attract masculisted men. In time, as masculist ideas spread through the culture, there will be so many bi-conscious feminists that the remaining more conservative, slower-witted, monoconscious feminists will feel the moral pressure on them from the bi-conscious feminists, who will look upon them as gender political retards. The monoconscious feminists will also notice that they are losing out to the bi-conscious feminists in persuading the most attractive males to mate with them. This realization on the part of the monoconscious feminists will motivate many of them to make the effort to bone up on masculist ideas so that they too can become bi-conscious and hence increase their odds of catching a man. As the proportion of feminists who go bi-conscious increases, correspondingly, the level of intolerance of society against monoconsciousness will increase, making life even more intolerable for monoconscious feminists, until nearly all monoconscious feminists have died off or converted themselves into bi-consciousness. Then we will see millions/billions of bi-conscious relationships in which gender issues are no longer a problem. We will by then have moved on into an era in which gender politics is a topic for the historians, the way the slave trade is for us today. Just as nobody believes in the morality of Negro slavery today, so too will belief in monoconsciousness also be seen to be just as immoral as Negro slavery. It may, however, take a decade or two to reach this state. Major cultural changes take time, usually several decades. The masculists will just have to be patient and in the meantime put in the work to cause these changes, particularly by persuading the journalists to transmit masculist ideas to the masses via their control of the mass media. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 360 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.